Hello, my name's Mark Burns. I taught for 12 years in secondary school. The subsequent 11 years I've been working with teachers around the UK, developing the quality of what they do through professional learning programmes. The title of my session is Building Back Better, and I'm drawing upon the WHO, who have a mantra that after natural disasters, that the most important thing is not to build back as was before, but to redesign and re-envisage how systems operate, so that instead of the constraining model of old, the new model that's built is one that gives greater potential for growth going forward. And it's that sense I want to draw upon, thinking about how do we create the most fertile conditions for teacher learning in schools, learning that grows performance and learning that impacts on the achievement of the children and young people in our schools. To help me with that in this session, I'm going to draw upon ideas related to collective teacher efficacy. So the work of Bandura, Jenny Donoghue, Helen Timperley and her models of professional learning. And all of the references for this session will be on the final slide if you want to go and do further reading on them. I'm also going to use this conceptual model to think about where teachers sit in our schools and the causes of where people work on a day-to-day basis. The horizontal axis relates to openness to learning, and one of the things that I'm very interested in is the extent to which we in schools have codified what it is to be an open to learning teacher. What are those characteristics that define open to learning teachers? For me, it revolves around resilience. To be a great teacher requires resilience to embed and develop practice. It requires an inquiring mind, asking questions about how can I make this particular theoretical idea work in my classroom. Someone who's open to feedback and recognises the power of giving high quality feedback to others. A willingness to revise and adapt their teaching practices to get the best out of the learners in front of them. Certainly a willingness to collaborate. I'm a great believer that improving teaching and raising student achievement in our schools is a team game. It's too exhausting to do it as an individual pursuit. And I have to say that the most open to learning teachers I've worked with, it's not something they switch on an inset day. It's the sort of thing that they're doing, constantly asking questions and thinking, how can I develop my practice and support the development of my peers? And one of the characteristics of it being habitual learner is you're likely to be research-ed conferences and seeking to glean nuggets from that. I thought back to last September when I worked with over 100 NQTs from one of the large academy chains down in London, and what was really clear on those 3 sessions that I ran was A, how open to learning these teachers were, and B, how they recognised there was such a journey to go on. And I wondered how we could create a school system where we nurture that thirst for growth and development. Craved and Papai talk about in their paper the fact that there's a prevailing belief that teachers tend to improve in the first 3 to 5 years of their profession, and then after that performance improvement tails off. And yet they counter that by saying that in the most supportive professional learning environments, teachers continue to improve over time, whereas in the least effective ones, teaching performance actually falls. The trajectory we'd really like to see is, of course, teachers retaining that openness to learning as they move up into that top right-hand quadrant. And the power of this top right quadrant is that it builds teachers what Jenny Donoghue talks about, collective efficacy, a belief that working together that they can positively impact the achievement of students that they themselves teach. And a couple of underpinning principles which underpin teacher efficacy is around their own mastery experiences. So teachers in this top right hand quadrant will regularly experience success in their own classrooms, and as a consequence that will motivate them to continue to develop their practice. And secondly, working with other folk in the same team or in the same organisation, you'll be spurred on by what Donahue and talks about vicarious experiences. Seeing other people teaching the same students and achieving success with them is a motivator that we can do likewise. And yet it's not all the case that teachers move up this vertical axis. In some cases they may move over to here, and currently these teachers are what Eric Hoffer would describe as incredibly vulnerable. Hoffer's quote, in times of drastic change, it's the learners who inherit the world, the learned are left to inherit a world that no longer exists. And certainly the challenges that we face in our schools going forward require all teachers and leaders to be open to learning, and that being close to learning means that inevitably that high performer will fall over time. The thing I really want to unpick in this session though is what are the conditions that cause teachers to move towards becoming close to learning? And I've seen it in schools, I've seen it in certain teams in schools where that is pervading. And I really want to unpick from some of the work that I've done, some surveys I've done with more than 350 teachers in 45 teams across more than 30 schools. What are some of the common themes? And also, whilst exploring those themes, I want to look at some possible solutions to them. The first one, and it was cited amongst many of the teachers in this survey, was the desire for a reduction in processing overload. Something that can't be cured with chocolate Fridays or aromatherapy twilights. It's the idea that working in schools is just too fast paced, and actually we'll hear very committed professionals ordinarily say, change professional learning, we haven't got time for it. My background's in economics, and in economics one of the early things that you learn is the concept of opportunity cost. It's the principle that underpins the sense that there's no such thing as a free lunch. And I think in education, if we're building back better, one of the key things we should take into account is the concept of opportunity cost, because every single thing we ask teachers to do means that they're unable to do something else. And so one of the things at this stage, thinking just on a personal level, but also organisationally if you're here as a leader, is where are the opportunities to reflect on your organisation and ask, as we return to more normal schooling, what can we stop doing, and how can we build back better? Some suggestions from conversations I've had over the last couple of years. One of the key things that undermine processing capacity in schools and actually give teachers cognitive overload is a lack of shared clarity about excellence, a lack of shared understanding about goals. What does excellent teaching look like? What are the processes? How do systems and processes work in our school? Time and time again where I've seen processing overload in organisations, in schools, it's underpinned by the fact that we haven't got shared clarity over these processes, and it leads to miscommunication. The second, and this can often be caused by over-enthusiasm. In fact, there's one group of staff who dread their head teacher going out on conferences because they know he'll come back with a raft of new initiatives he'll be seeking to embed the next day, is the idea of not understanding how cognitive load theory actually affects teachers too. And that the game shouldn't be about launching initiatives. I think in education we're good at launching initiatives. I think we're not so spectacularly brilliant at embedding initiatives. So from all the nuggets you're taking away from all of the great research-led sessions over the course of this weekend, my question to you would be, have a clear theory of action that ensures you're understanding how you're going to embed that process across your school. And make sure you've worked out the time cost and the resource costing of that, and check that you're not overloading teachers unintentionally with your enthusiasm. The third is examine systems and processes in your school that are inefficient, things that don't work. Fourth, I could have amended this to Zoom and Teams as well, but this idea that just because we've got an electronic age doesn't necessarily speed up communication. It actually can swamp people. There's a great deal of research out there pointing at the fact that human beings now are really struggling with the concept of multitasking because they're so connected. And one of the things I'd ask in schools, do we have protocols around that to make sure that teachers are not and leaders are not being overloaded by day-to-day interactions via email? Unfocused meetings that lack dialogue, time and again. When we come together, questions I always ask school leaders is, have you worked out the cost of this meeting in staff time? Can you put a cost to that? And more importantly, what's the cost in loss of goodwill of meetings where nothing actually gets done and nothing actually gets achieved? And then the final two, I think, is this whole understanding that in education, it's teams that change schools, not individuals. And individual privatised practice really is stifling in that it creates excessive workload for both teachers, TAs and school leaders. So how can we come about and narrow that gap in terms of experience for our young people in school that we know exists by stopping people working on an individual level and instead building a greater sense of collaboration? Ben Hunt Davis, author of Clarity, is very good on this. Ben was a member of the GB rowing squad that were perennial also-rans in the Olympic Games until Sydney 2000, when they adopted a mantra that we drop stuff unless it makes the boat go faster. And the mantra within his team all the time was, we'll stop doing things that don't make the boat go faster. And I think that mantra of looking at our school and examining all of the things that we do and asking, does this actually improve teaching? Does it create better an environment for collective teacher efficacy? If it doesn't, let's stop doing it. The other impact of busyness and processing overload, and I think I've seen this time and again with teachers and school leaders, is the sense of inattentional blindness. I think a real characteristic of the best teachers I've worked with over the years has been their skill at noticing things in their classroom and then adapting their teaching in light of that feedback. And the same too with leaders. Daniel Kahneman talks a lot about inattentional blindness and the power and importance of slow thinking. So a corollary benefit of reducing processing overload within our schools is we can be wiser individuals and make better, slower decisions. The second key area, and again this was cited by so many teachers in the survey that we've carried out, it's also underpinned as a key driver for collective teacher efficacy, is creating more opportunities for deeper dialogue in our organisations. How can we move beyond an environment where we are engaged in multiple monologue to an environment where we're engaged in deep dialogue? And for me, it's asking ourselves, when we say things, are they always understood by the other person in the same way? It's no good saying, does that make sense? Because it may make sense to that person, but in an entirely different way. So I'm a great believer that assuming is guessing, and that only through dialogue, like we have in classrooms, do we get a sense of the understanding that the other person is making of what we say. Second, making time in meetings for deep dialogue to achieve greater team clarity. And if people are going to push me on areas that I'll be really focused on, it will be talking about modelling, explaining, really delving down into how we model and explain. There's a great science team I worked with last year who will sit down after the end of unit assessments and look at which classes have achieved greatest clarity and greatest understanding on key points in the scheme of work. And they'll look to those individual teachers and get them to explore and explain how they've modelled and explained it to their class. And you can see other people in the team are saying that's a great idea and they're making notes on their revised scheme of work. It's only through that deep dive that we unpick questioning strategies, modelling strategies, the specifics of the language and vocabulary that we're using, the analogies and metaphors that we're using to help students grasp new or maybe abstract concepts. I think there's huge value in exploring models and gathering in the process of comparative assessment, looking at poor and good models, trying to unpick the thinking process that our learners have fallen into that has led them to make that misunderstanding of what we've explained. And these are equally useful in classrooms to push learners to explain why the exemplar is being written out wrong and identifying how they're going to prevent making that same mistake themselves. And finally, and I've seen this as a member of the Cog Science group on Google, the power of collaborative dialogue that extends beyond our own schools. I'm a great believer that however big your team is in school, it's only a fraction of the talent and the ideas that are out across the UK. And I know personally there's many teachers I've put onto joining the Cognitive Science group who work abroad, who work in Scotland, and they've got a great deal out of it too. What I've found is that when teachers are engaged in this deep dialogue, it gives them what Frederick Hertzberg, that great bastion of employee motivation, that great theorist of employee motivation, he talks about the power of job enrichment. And when you see teachers deeply engaged in unpicking their craft and identifying how to improve the impact of what they do, you see teachers really get energised by that. So for me, and this is a really useful tool, this came from a little, and the reference to it is at the end of this presentation. It's really exploring and reflecting on how deep dialogue is in our school, in our teams. You know, is it a preponderance of monologue, storytelling about events that have happened? Or does it move deeper? And some of the things that cause it to move deeper are space and time, but also the degree of relational trust that enables people to openly say, I've got a problem, it's not working for me. Let's explore how we can do this better ourselves. And so for me, that time, space, the oxygen, and the strong relational trust and the protocols around dialogue can really frame a safe environment where teachers, instead of talking about the things they're successful at, can actually explore the things that they're struggling with and struggling to implement in their classrooms. So some of the frameworks I've shared with school leaders in the past to try and develop what I describe what Rosenstein talks about as the we do in lessons, but the we do in meetings, is frameworks that enable us to really deeply discuss and take away the principles that we're talking through, and making sure we've got an understanding about how we can apply them to our own context. And I think that's a big challenge in education, and why we need deeper dialogue than in some other industries, is because the complexity of applying this principle maybe to year 7 to a A-level class, or if you're a primary teacher, from one subject you're really confident in teaching to another where you are less so. And the third key area, investing in professional regard. Professional regard, by that I mean teachers and leaders feeling valued as professionals, capable of growth and supported to have that growth and development. Remember, we're talking about collective teacher efficacy, and two of those key drivers for that are increasing impact in the classroom and seeing others achieve greater impact in their classrooms. And for me, in classrooms like in staff rooms, I think one of the biggest drivers for feeling confident as a teacher or as a young person who's a student is that progressive increase in competence. Yeah, I like this because I'm good at it. So how can we build that within our schools? For me, there's a key area to focus on would be feedback. How high quality is feedback that's exchanged within our schools amongst adults? We've had a great deal of focus on it in classrooms, but I'd be really interested in us going back to basics and just exploring things like, what is the point of feedback? Why do we exchange it? What does great feedback look and sound like in our school when it's given and when it's received? Have we got clear protocols? Feedback is a gift, but only if it's delivered and received as a gift. So one of the questions I'd ask you to reflect on is, to what extent is feedback craved within our team? What are the reasons to the answer above? If they're positive, have you unpicked that? If they're negative or variable, what lies behind that? To what extent have we got shared clarity on the why, the what and the how of high quality feedback? You know, I'm a great lover of Ron Berger's work and his definition of high quality feedback in his book An Ethic of Excellence is feedback is kind, specific and helpful. And I think if feedback is kind, specific and helpful amongst adults in schools, it helps teachers and leaders to go progressively +1 on their current level of performance. It's micro-focus. It provides opportunities for shared understanding. And without that, the danger is that we can swamp teachers who haven't got that processing capacity for large amounts of improvement guidance, or they may receive feedback that's inconsistent and leave them confused. And what are the consequences of ineffective feedback in our schools? From my experience, I see lots of teachers become closed to learning and closed to the potential that great feedback can support them. When I see great coaching and feedback from one teacher, from one leader to another, you see people's eyes light up to the potential. And what you see is teachers and leaders saying, give me more, that really, really helped me. I think a further area that underpins strong professional regard in schools is the quality of professional learning. So one of the things I'd ask you to reflect on is the quality of the professional learning offer in your schools. And not just thinking about professional learning as CPD programs, but actually thinking about the extent to which informal professional learning is taking place in every meeting, every interaction, and the space and oxygen for that during the week in school. But do we have structured opportunities based upon the principles of high quality professional learning from the likes of Helen Timperley, where teachers have opportunities to plan, test things out in safe environments, and then the chance to reflect not on their perceptions of the impact, but on the impact in reality? Where are the opportunities for a micro focus for improvement? Instead of people given 15 different areas to focus on during the course of the year, what's the +1 area that if they worked on between now and Christmas would make the biggest impact in their teaching? Where are the opportunities for that safe chance to test things out, research and development? What I've learned over the years is where teachers have the chance to test things out in a safe environment, they're more willing to have a go, and by experimenting and sometimes failing, they get great learning from that. And finally, where are the opportunities for us to and team approach to it? Because if we co-plan, co-teach and co-reflect, if it doesn't work, we co-own it. There's no blame. And when teachers have that safe environment, it really connects them up with what it's like to be that novice again who's seeking to grow and develop. So in conclusion, building back better is asking that question: how can we create a profession where teachers come in on a Monday morning to learn just as much as the young people and the children that they teach, where they commend the profession as one where there's an opportunity to use your brain to solve the complex problems of learning, something that's essentially invisible in classrooms, and how we can impact that better, and ultimately to have that sense of collective efficacy, that belief that between us we can continue growing the impact on the students that we work with. I provided here the references to the session. I hope the session was useful to you, and I'd love to get in touch with any of you either on Twitter, I'm at Learn Imperative, or if any of you have got thoughts and reflections, my email address is mark@learningimperative.co.uk.